All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to stay on schedule. If there's one thing that Pastor asked me to do, if I was going to be doing this, was to stay on time, because I know y'all want to go home at 7:30, so we're going to do all that. And a couple disclaimers, because I told the prices I was going to give a couple disclaimers. If this is one of those opportunities where you think it's going to be that you roast the president, not the scenario you want to do it, okay? No roasting the president with difficult questions. We're going to probably, during the question time, I really think it'd be great. Oh, I knew Rob was going to say something. Be careful, I'm very prepared for hecklers today. So during question time, I think it'd be great if we could kind of just open it up. If I don't have the answer, it's very likely I might not have the answer. So in that case, we're going to have a group discussion. I'll probably be pressing on a few of I know that have worked very diligently with the word. So welcome and thank you for being here. So glad to have y'all here. I'm going to start us off by kind of setting the stage from chapter 6, and then I'll move us into prayer. And then we'll get started on with the rest of our program. So I'm going to kind of recap just a little bit about 6. Chapter 6 kind of got us fired up, right? Kind of feel that build-up going. We knew that the battle was coming. We knew the Israelites had been charging, grumbling, but charging for a significant amount of time. We know there was a whole generation, 40 years, that was, had to die in the wilderness. But we were really feeling that pent-up energy, and I don't know about when you were reading this chapter, how that felt for you, but I kind of felt that energy, that nervous energy, and we're going straight ahead. So that's kind of what was exciting for me reading chapter 6 and preparing for 7. We saw what happened to Aaron. We saw what happened to Moses. We know what happens when we disobey or if we don't follow those good, faithful things that God's telling us to do. We know what happens. God can be very, very, very powerful. And so sending those guys up on Mount Hebron and Tabor, sending them up on a mountain and telling them you got to watch and not touch. See and not touch. I think Mary said it during our last week's Bible study. Kind of seeing and not touching was very much like Disneyland. You got to Disneyland, the gates were closed. You can't go in. You're right? That was exactly how Aaron and Aaron and Moses felt when they had to watch from a distance and see this great promised land and just couldn't enter it. So we saw that, that kind of what God's able to do. He's capable of being powerful too, and loving. So we know that was a really. We also know what happens when we question God's motives. We read about that, and what happens when we question our faith in Him. And He can be very powerful. And I wanted to read a real quick passage from 6 that talked about the power, and the fear that God can put in us. On page 77 it says, "Now may the Lord's strength be displayed just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet He does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and the 4th generation." So you can see, it's not messing around. He's really not messing around here. Okay? He can be very scary. There's no doubt. God and all of us reading the story got really fed up with the complaining. I think if anybody here says they weren't sick and tired of hearing the Israelites complain, you're lying in church. So it was a lot of complaining going on, and it has happened historically for a very long time. So we got tired of that, and God had had enough, and He said He'll wipe out the whole wicked community. Okay? And for some of us, that's kind of scary too. God's supposed to be loving, and He's got His hand on us, and He's guiding us, but He can be very scary, and there's for good reason. He wants you to follow His law, and He wants you to follow Him. So, for 40 years, people were wandering in the wilderness. And then we meet Joshua, okay? I wanted to look him up to see kind of what he might have looked like, his physique. So I went to Google and I typed in Joshua's physique. Let me warn you, don't do that. Okay? Don't type that in. Okay? So rather I ran into an article I think that would serve us all a lot better. Don't Google Joshua's physique. What Christians want to know is the article I ran into, because it talked about Joshua and kind of what he was looking like and what he felt like, and what it was very possible that we vision in this way. What Christians want to know. What does every successful leader have in common? the ability to focus on the task at hand and execute with thoughtful precision. A strong military leader in battle can't have success if he or she allows the everyday cares of life to load them down. They must find their zone in which they block out everything not relating to their mission. Joshua's life and decisions serve as a model for all believers engaged in spiritual warfare. So, you might be on the fence of where you are spiritually, but he never wavered that. He stayed right on course. Obviously, you got to stay on course, and we all kind of know what that feels like sometimes. Now, it's time for battle. So let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for bringing every one of these families and friends together to study you and learn your word and the story, which is just a phenomenal story. Each and every one of us needs to continue to read and follow and obey. We know what happens when we don't. So thank you, Lord, for watching over every one of us over this study and for the rest of the night. And watch over their families and put a guiding hand on those that are questioning some of this stuff. And let's put them in the right direction. Your story is the story. And that's forever. Dear Lord, thank you so much. We pray your name. Amen.
After Moses died, God gave Joshua the job of leading the Israelites. The first thing he did was send spies into Jericho, a city Israel was about to invade. While they were there, the two spies hid in the home of a woman named Rahab, who was a prostitute. That day, the king of Jericho heard about the spies, but Rahab hid the two spies on her roof and told the king's messengers that the spies had already left and she didn't know where they were. Then, when it was safe, she lowered the men down to the ground using a rope. Days later, Joshua led his army to the city of Jericho. They marched around the walls of the city for 7 days. Then, on the seventh day, they marched around the walls 7 times, blew their trumpets, and let out a loud shout. When they did, the walls of the city completely collapsed, and Israel's army charged in and conquered the city. They burned the city to the ground and killed every man, woman, child, and animal in the city, except for Rahab and her family. For years, Joshua and the Israelites marched through the Promised Land, defeating their enemies, killing every living thing in each city, and dedicating their victories to God. Eventually, the Israelites took control of much of the Promised Land. Finally, when he was very old, Joshua gathered all of the leaders of Israel around him. Just like Moses did, he reminded everyone of all the things God had done for them. Then, he placed a large stone under an oak tree as a reminder to all to follow the laws of God.
Pretty fun stuff. I was hearing Mary laughing when we watched the art stuff. She's always fired up for the art. Thank you very much. Well, that was a great video. So I'm going to now go kind of into a presentation I provided. Go ahead, next slide. All right. So basically, what we're talking about here, to get in to this battle, to get into the Promised Land, there were basically 3 things that to get in. We knew there were several things. There's a couple more we'll talk about later, trust me. It's kind of hard to avoid. But there were 3 things that God had kind of said, hey, look, be strong and courageous, obey all the laws, meditate day and night, and do these things. And God said, you'll be prosperous and successful. I think it'd be great if in every aspect of our lives, if we could do that, those 3 things, and we'll be prosperous and successful. I think if we can apply that in everyday life, I think that would be fabulous. Next slide. All right. Anybody see what that looks like? Anybody know who that is? Braveheart. Okay, Braveheart. This is kind of what I was feeling when I was reading chapter 6, going into 7, and then knowing there were basically 3 times that we have this inspirational, go get them, we're going to fight, I'm on my horse, I'm leading my group in, the Israelites. And this happened 3 times. We know that happened with God to Moses, Moses to Joshua. And, these were very, very, very strong messages that were being provided. And the third one, obviously, to Joshua to the Israelites. So with that, there was very inspirational speeches that happened. There was a lot of excitement and anticipation, fear and doubt. We know that when we're preparing ourselves for such a huge and monumental moment, that we're finally going to see the promised land. There was a few battles we had to fight, but we knew, this is like 600 years ago, there was a promise made that this was going to happen. And now, we're talking, it's going to happen. Charge away. Inspirational, yeah. I mean, that's, for me, I'm ready to go. I'm fired up. Let's go. We're going into battle. Not so fast, though, okay? Next slide. 2 little things just had to happen before we can get you into the promised land. Anybody want to tell what those 2 things were? 1, cross the River Jordan. And the second thing, which, by the way, I don't have a slide for, circumcision. Okay, those were 2 things that had to happen. Okay? Don't look it up on Google. Okay? So there were 2 things that really had to happen. So you arrive at the river, okay, and touch the feet to the water, and it opens up. Okay? That's just to cross the river. Once they get to the other side, ow. Thank you, Mary. Ow. So we knew that they had to go through that. It was, almost like a rite of passage, but it was for the flesh, right? You needed to take care of this in order to be clean and to be in the flesh. So that happened. And that had to happen before you get to the promised land. Next slide. Okay, so you get to the other side. Everybody's been circumcised. The only people that was said in the book that was moving around for the first 3 days was the ladies. We can understand why. So, obviously, after Rahab's helps, securing the spies up on the roof, everything happens there. We know that by grace of God, the Jordan River, just like parted out, opened up. And then we got math, and this is going to be part of my fun, because I'm not a great mathematician, hoping some of you are, but go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay? Here it is. We've got this mathematical equation that we must figure out. I'm going to ask for your help. But it has to do with, obviously, the Ark of the Covenant, sending it in front with the trumpets, Ark of the Covenant, and then blaring those trumpets. And there was, I believe it was once a day, 6 days, the 7th day, blaring those trumpets. You had to do it every time around. I think it was 7 times. So do the math. How many trumpets were blaring? You're good as math as I am. That's great. So obviously, that's where I feel like there was a lot of confusion. I wanted to figure out, okay, how many trumpets were blaring. But we have then the shout, which drops the wall. Okay? If you follow these concepts, if you follow these exact steps that God had given you, trust in Him, and it will happen. I will hand the kings to you. They are yours for the defeat. So, boom. Follow these basic situations, and all of that will work out. And go ahead, next slide. Okay, so we defeated Jericho. And then I have this spreadsheet up here that shows you your opponents, your places of battle, your kings. That actually happened for the Amorites. And then it shows who the aggressor was. And then on the far right it says, what was the result of basically what happened? What a great percentage of wins, right? So we talk about being faithful. We talk about obeying God's commands. That's how you do it. Follow His commands, and on that far right corner, it talks about who was victorious. You got Israel, you got AE. We had to fight that twice because Achan couldn't seem to figure out. God's command was, don't fight this battle. This is my spoil. I'm dealing with this fight. Let me have it. I'll take care of it. And Achan didn't follow those basic simple instructions, and guess what? They had to fight again. So the second time in AE they won, and then it goes right into Israel winning all the way down. 5 kings that comprised of the Amorite battle. And all the way the rest down that right column is victory. Okay? That's what we're talking about. Following God's commands gets us victory. And I think it's pretty easy to tell based on that spreadsheet. Okay. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. He fought AE twice. And then he went through, took care of the rest of them. And not following God's orders, we found that was the reason why they were defeated in AE. And I think that would happen over and over again. Anybody that's not following those commands, you best be prepared. You're going to have to battle again, or it's just going to take a defeat. Okay, next slide. All right, so we have the promised land, right? So now we have victories all the way across the board, and now we need to lay down that law that we all couldn't follow for so long. We could not follow any of these commands. We got tired, we were hungry, we were thirsty. You gave us manna, and then that wasn't good enough, and so quail. And then, nothing was ever good enough. So finally, after all of this is said and done, the law of getting through these battles and then following God's commands, they laid down the law written on a stone and put it under an oak tree. And this was, I asked somebody I worked with, Jason, I asked him about it, talked with him, I said, I felt very like it was the commandments, right? Like it was the commandments. Those 2 tablets came out of the Ark of God. But it really wasn't, and I talked to Pastor then after that, basically what that stone underneath the rock, under the oak tree, was almost like a historical landmark. You're driving down the road, you see a historical landmark, 500 yards. It's almost like that, where you're kind of laying down, this happened here. And he gave the example of Mount Rushmore. Very similar to that. If you're very into presidents, you've got this beautiful depiction. This is what it felt like if you were to look at that stone under the oak tree before they entered the promised land. You had to lay down the law, and you had to be faithful to get to the promised land. So we had lots of fighting, we had lots of swords, and we had a lot of grumbling. But at the end, we really feel like we can get somewhere that was promised to us. It was promised before, it failed. It was promised because just the word couldn't be followed. So ultimately, victory. All right? Okay, let's we have the next video, is that?
This is your story, this is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story.
Page 64 if you want to fill it in.
After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them. To the Israelites, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. So I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go.
Can you think of a time in your life when you were faced with an overwhelming challenge right in front of you that you had to confront and it scared you to death? What did you do? Did you face it or did you retreat? I immediately think of the soldiers at Normandy and the fear that must have been racing through their minds and hearts as they were about to jump into the water and charge the beach on June the 6th, 1944. On the day before, General George Patton gives a chilling speech to the Third Army. Listen to just a part of his words to them. "I do not want to get any messages saying I am holding my position. We are not holding. We are advancing constantly, and we are not interested in holding on to anything. Our basic plan of operation is to advance and to keep on advancing, regardless of whether or not we have to go over or under or through the enemy." Well, today in chapter 7 of the story, the Israelites are faced with such an overwhelming challenge. It's time for them to enter the land that God promised to give them 600 years earlier. The upper story plan of God must advance. But there's a problem. There are already people who possess the land. There are lots of them. They are wicked people who wouldn't think twice about cutting your head off, and apparently a bunch of them are giants, really tall people. In order to take possession of the land, they're going to have to take it from these people. 40 years earlier, 12 men from Israel went out to spy the land, saw these giants, and retreated. Joshua is now in charge. 4 times in the opening 4 paragraphs of chapter 7, God instructs Joshua to be strong and courageous. It was only Joshua and Caleb of the 12 who believed that they should have gone in 40 years ago. Only 2 of the 12. This time Joshua decides to send in only 2 spies. You see, committees seldom make courageous decisions, but safe ones. It's time for a courageous decision. How could they possibly be strong and courageous in this circumstance? The odds are stacked completely against them. We learn in this chapter that they needed 3 things to succeed. First, they needed to be people of the Word. God tells Joshua at the opening of this chapter, "Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." You may recall that the only time they were unsuccessful is when Achan violated the instructions of God and kept some of the property or spoil of the people of Jericho for himself. Their second conquest, the city of Ai, failed. You might have noticed that when Joshua dealt with this situation and they conquered Ai the second time around, that Joshua gathered all the people together and he reads the word, the law. Here's what the story tells us. Afterward, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived in the land among them. To avoid the Achan situation again, not only did Joshua need to be a man of the word, but all the people needed to be people of the word, to know it, to meditate on it, and to do what it says. This is the secret of success. Second, they needed to be people of prayer. God told Joshua, "You can be strong and courageous because the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." God is saying to Joshua, before you move forward, talk to me and make sure I'm going before you. There is no way you're going to beat these giants without me. You'll notice that in their first victory that the ark of the Lord, which represented God's presence, marched ahead of the army. Again, the only time they were unsuccessful is when Achan disobeyed the word of the Lord and secretively took the spoil for himself. The story tells us that God was not with them when they attacked Ai. The ark was absent. In order to be successful, they needed to constantly seek God to see if he was in on it. If he is, charge. If not, hold your position. Finally, they needed to be people identified with God. Before they engaged in their first battle, God instructed all the males to be circumcised. Circumcision outwardly identified them as belonging to God. This was something that the law instructed when a child is born, but they stopped doing it while they're in the wilderness. So before they began the conquest, all the males, young and old, were circumcised. We're told in the story that for a few painful days, the only able-bodied people in the camp were females. But when it was time for them to take off into battle, they were marked as belonging to God. With those three things in place, the battle begins. God dams up the Jordan River 16 miles upstream, enabling the nation of Israel to cross. They conquer Jericho first. After that, they conquer the city called Ai. Then they take out 5 kings and cities that came together against Israel. This is called the Southern Campaign. Then they move to the north and take out an alliance of 14 or so cities in the Northern Campaign. When it's all said and done, this is the report we receive. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. In the lower story, the giants are bigger than the Israelites. But in the upper story, God is bigger than the giants. We face battles in our own life. Like Joshua and the children of Israel, we need to be people of the Word. We need to look intently into God's Word, to discover His will, to learn how to proceed, to find courage and to find strength. We need to be people of prayer. We need to ask God if we should move forward or hold our position. You see, prayer involves listening to God. If He's in it, charge. If He's not, hold your position. Finally, we need to be people identified with God. For us today, it means if we've come into a relationship with God through Christ on the inside, we need to publicly declare our devotion and allegiance to Him on the outside by being baptized, unashamedly identifying ourselves with God in private and in public. Remember, with God on our side, we will be successful. In the lower story, giants are bigger than we are. But in the upper story, God is bigger than our giants.
Great stuff. Great stuff. So page 68 is where we filled in the questions or the fill in the blanks for that video, so you have an opportunity. We'll review that in a moment. But first I wanted to read something in this book as well. On page 100, once they entered, there was this comment that feels like it's ever present, is the fear. And making sure that, hey, everything's been given to you, but it can also be very quickly taken away. So I would like to read here, every promise has been fulfilled, not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised, you have come to you, so He will bring on you all the evil things He's threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land He's given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which He commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land He's given you. So, being given the promised land, and then being able to enjoy all that it has to offer, can be very quickly taken away. And I think there's another situation, everything in our lives, I think we can apply that to. So let's keep that in mind. 68, let's go ahead and answer those questions real quick on 68. Based on the video, if we want to go ahead and review that. So the upper story plan of God must advance. Charge. Okay, they needed to be people of the Word. Fabulous. This is a really good class. Man. They needed to be people of prayer. And they needed to be people with God. In the upper story, God is bigger than the... Great. You guys all passed. That was fabulous. So let's go ahead and, I'd like to go ahead and ask a few questions, but this is also a good opportunity while we're talking about these questions and giving some answers, if you have questions, like I said, we'll open it up. We can have an open discussion. We have about 30 minutes, so this is great. We're going to go over the questions and see what kind of stuff you guys got. So on page 64, we've got, number one, why had fear struck the hearts of the people of Rahab City? They had heard how God had dried up the Red Sea. That is correct. Okay. And number two, what was the order of events at the Battle of Jericho? If that kind of goes with my math equation, yeah. Yep. March trumpets, shout, walls fall down. Number three, we've got, why did the Israelites choose to defend the people of Gibeon? All of the above. The Gibeonites made a treaty with Joshua. The Gibeonites cried out to Joshua for help. 5 kings had joined together to destroy Gibeon. And yes, all of the above. Number 4, what did Joshua say would serve the Lord in his final words to the Israelites? He, himself and his household. All right. So, let's go over now on 65. We've got these. I don't know if you had an opportunity to fill in some of these, but I think it also opens us up for being able to have a discussion. As Joshua prepared to enter the promised land, what are some of the reasons he may have needed to be challenged to be strong and courageous? Anybody want to venture their guess or answer for that? Nobody?
Maybe to prove to himself that he can rise to the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. You felt he could do it? Praise God joined with Joshua in the battle against the Amorites.
Said that they rode the large hailstones out there, and then the sun would not go down until a full day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it has some time in it, but the first time that God had listened to.
Yeah, the first time he'd ever listened, right, to, and actually responded to a demand, right? So, and I kind of questioned that at first. I'm going, wait a second, didn't by chance, did Moses, or, I mean, somebody else had to have given a demand and him follow? But this is the first time that actually happened, and they do refer to that a command was kind of given to do these things and actually happened. So, and it does reference that. He actually, for the first time, listened to a human. So, good stuff. As Joshua prepared to die, what do you think he was trying to accomplish in his final speech to the people?
Believe and follow God or else. You just laid it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You follow God and you stick with the upper story, you'll be fine.
That's right. I think you know, there's a lot. I mean, I have learned to be far more fearful of God. And
You mean awe?
I think, yeah, I think there's a full-rounded respect. And, you know, there is a respectful fear. And I think Pastor and I talked after last week's Bible study in the hallway. I think he was mentioning last week about gospel reductionism. Okay, kind of this, people kind of mold God into this palatable situation, right? I think you referenced Santa at one point. But basically what that was, it's molding into something that you can digest and something that you can, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this. And it's not a false God, but we're making it more palatable for us to ask of him things. And so we're kind of just making it a little easier for us to follow. And that's, he mentioned gospel reductionism. And I thought, boy, that sounds really complicated and scary. And so I went home and I reviewed it and I researched a little bit about it. And that's kind of what it is. It's just making it more palatable for all of us. Because we don't always see God as being this this very strong being. We always look at him as being a loving God. His guiding hand is on us. So when we hear about fear and that strong, scary respect, I think there's something to be said about that. So, any other comments on that? Anybody want to comment on anything? Yeah, when I said the disclaimer was I'm not going to answer questions, you could throw them at me, but I said we'll talk about it amongst ourselves. You can go to the next one. We've got, does anybody have a question? No? All right. Man, this is either I'm doing really good or really poorly, so we'll have to talk to Pastor on that. Number 5. After reading chapter 7, what is one question you wish you could ask God about what you've read? Anyone but Mary? I mean, anybody want to comment on that?
Oh, come on, I'm tired
No.
of listening to you talk too.
Okay, why don't some of the more common folk, I mean, I understand the need to overtake the government of each province or city, but why won't say like, you know, the common folk allowed to maybe transition into, you know, well, it was a Christianity at that point, but, you know, instead of just wiping everybody out, why not try and save the
Yeah, starting from clean slate, right? Like it seems drastic, and that seems very drastic. And that's what, when I was talking about from last week's conversation, it's like, do we really? I mean, does it really need to happen that way?
I don't think God wanted the people to be tempted to go back to different ways of thinking. I think God has shown His power through that, and didn't want to dilute the tribe of Israel that He spent 40 years already educating and developing and molding
Yeah.
It was part of the question that we asked last week too, which is why, how can we have this good, this wonderful God who created everything and watch Him wipe everybody
Yeah,
out?
children with
But look how many times
Every-
it's happened in, you know, the Bible leading up to this
I know.
already. You know,
There's
Noah, his family was spared, and
Yeah,
you know,
we've
Sodom
seen-
and Gomorrah.
We've seen several instances where it's just, you know what, enough is enough.
God wanted to do it to the Israelites earlier.
Yeah.
When Moses came down and made the calf. And he was like, I want to wipe these people out. But Moses pleaded with them, you know, don't do that because your enemies are going to see what you do to them. So, yeah,
And you know, we're not further along, but you can see where, you know, the Israelites have brought in other countries or whatever, and intermarried and whatnot, and they started following the other gods, and, you know, we're still very weak.
We're not
To
very
this
bright.
day, we're still very weak.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, I had a couple notes
Sin
that,
is present.
well, you know, and so that mass wiping out, I could ask that in here. Does anybody feel that I mean, that power and that need to women, children, a whole generation, you know, if you're over, was it over 20? If you're over 20, that's the whole thing. You're gonna be, that's it. Yeah. Do we know if that I mean, does anybody feel like want to contribute to, does that kind of thing happen now? I mean, does that happen today? Scott, did you ask that kind of last week? Was there kind of a similar question about, does that happen anymore? Do we want to talk on that? Does God display His power in such a way like that, where it's just, you know?
It's still going on right now. I mean, wiping out.
A lot of things going on. Yeah.
I don't know that it's God doing it
Right.
or evil in the world.
Right.
It's-
A lot going on. Yeah, so a lot of things happen, a lot of negative things happen, and you know, we're all looking for a place to put that. Process.
You're talking about, you know, God wiping everybody out. Also, we need to look at the other hand, if the people are trying to wipe Christianity out and wipe God out from the other angle. They're blowing out countries and cities and killing people.
Yeah, it's tough.
The battle still goes on.
Battle still goes on. Yeah, that's a true statement for sure.
Like those winery fires,
What's that?
like the winery fires, the one in Nampa.
Right. I mean, it's something else, and you know, I know we all want to quantify that.
And those were man caused too.
They were?
Yeah, says on the news.
There's a lot. What was the last part?
Men start.
Oh. Yeah, so there's lots of evil, right? So what are you going to do with it? I'd like to learn a few lessons, you know. And I'd like to learn a few lessons about what not to do, and I'm reading these stories, what I know I need to do differently than we've seen. I mean, I know I complain, but there was a lot of complaining going on prior to getting into this battle, and it was just consistent. And for all of us reading, it was like, holy cow, enough's enough. To me, it didn't feel like they deserved. You know, it's like that feeling of, man, you spend so much time. I mean, I know with me and my children, enough is enough. You're not going to get that. So, you know, it's really putting things into perspective and how long this complaining went on with the Israelites before there was enough is enough. You know, and so wiping out the entire generation, man, that did it, right? Like that was gonna clean us up. We're gonna get right in passage. You're in. Any other questions? We have some more questions, or talk about some more things?
I don't know, I think it's the number 7 there is kind of something that intrigues me, because God said, you know, don't rest on the 7th day, but for them, like, they live on Pharaoh on the 7th day, right?
On the 7th. Yeah, and I don't know exactly whether that was on the Sabbath, particularly for this, but yes, there was 7 days, right, of work. There was 7 days of March, and yeah.
I don't know why this number,
Well, maybe they had to earn it. Maybe they had to earn it, right? So, and there was a lot of other things that we're going to have to do. And I think as we look at the next chapter, there's a lot more to come. Pastor gave me one of the hardest chapters in the book because there's just so much things that are happening as far as these battles and the significant different things that they had to do in order to be successful. But ultimately, there was a lot of confusing things that they had to do. But again, it was all a matter of trusting in God. If everyone was just trusting in God, if He says He's going to deliver a victory for you, He's got the king in your hand. It's pretty simple stuff, I feel like. But sometimes our doubt and the darkness that we face every day it's a little more powerful sometimes. And that's why we're sinners, and that's why we have to continue to pound away at the Word, because we're facing challenges every single day. And I think every one of us wants to complain too. I want to complain about lots of stuff. I was talking about retirement earlier with the stories, and I'm too young to retire, but doggone it, I don't want to work. I want to retire and enjoy myself. But I was complaining, and I realized that. So yeah, sorry about that. I was complaining for sure.
You were just wishing.
I was wishing and complaining. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of both equally. So, any other comments? We have some other comments. It's 7:15, folks. We have some more time if you want to dive in some more. Anybody else want to throw some comments out?
I've always wondered
Questions?
how God put up with people's stupidity.
That's kind of what we're talking about, right? His patience levels.
They walked on the same ground as He did. They saw Him do all this stuff, and they were still didn't believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, I always wondered if He just wanted to sometimes just go up and slap them or go, yay, or whatever that word is, you know? Should have had yay. I mean, that always blows my mind when I read that. And that they walk with it, and they still don't get it.
It's turn, we hear that turn the cheek, right? I mean, how many times? How much patience does God have for us?
I don't think He's very patient anymore. I think He's upset.
Well, He is upset. There's no doubt. He was very upset. There's no doubt. And like you asked, I'd hate for God to slap me. I would really hate for God to slap me. I imagine what that would feel like. You know.
But that's not how I'm meaning that, though.
Go ahead, Rob. I'm
With
interested.
disasters, the fires, the hurricanes, and all that, I think the man upstairs is telling us that He's upset.
I won't argue that. I mean, I think that there's going to be consistent struggle. There's going to be consistent struggle. There's going to be continuous things that happen. And, I don't question God's motives. I've said that before.
I know you're not supposed to predict the end of time, but I think there's a sign.
Yeah. Well, let's keep watching out for it.
Yeah, it gets closer.
Yeah. That's right, when He's going to come back. That's right. And so, yeah, good point, Rob. I mean, these might be signs.
I don't know it's coming soon.
So,
You can't predict
so
it.
recommendation, heed to the signs. Maybe pay attention a little more, spend a little more time thinking and praying about what you might be able to do to help. Because doggone it, yeah, these might be signs.
Maybe this is God kicking us in the butt and saying, you know what? I need to be on the ground with you more. You need to tell people about me. You need to get God back not just in church, but in schools,
Yeah.
and in people's hearts.
His presence, yeah, absolutely. And that was actually one of the questions that I answered in this. It's, after reading chapter 7, what was one question you wish you could ask? And it's, I think, very similar to Eli. What else besides words can God display to present victory, right? Like, man, sometimes just put that stone out there that says, we won, next, let's go to the next problem, let's go to the next concern, and let's pray and go through it. But sometimes those signs are not as easy to see, as a stone under an oak tree, or, those very, very clear signs. Sometimes those signs of Him telling us what we need to do next or where we need to go, they're not very easily seen. So that was kind of how I answered that, right? It was very similar. Give me a sign. If there is a God, give me, what is that? If there is a God, give me a sign. But you have to be careful when you do that. Because God slapped you, we're done. Okay? What else we got? What else we got out there?
There's one thing you were talking about, how could these people be so stupid? And the thing is, we have all these years of analysis and stuff like that. You look in our smart Bibles and all the books that analyze this, that, and the other thing.
And we're not any smarter than they are.
I do that sometimes too.
Yeah, we got the Cliff Notes, right? It's like you feel like you got the answer guide. You just got to read them. And so all the mistakes that everyone else seems to have made, the answers to what you need to do to be prosperous and be successful was, it's all in there. It's all in the Word of God. So, yeah, we've got this path. We've been given this book to read and to follow for all the hundreds of thousands of mistakes that have been made, to not make those same mistakes. Yet we still do. We repeatedly make the same mistakes. And, we're born sinners. We just have to keep fighting the fight. So I agree. Great. Thank you, Carolyn. What else? Anybody? Does anybody want to talk on that? Anybody come up with that mathematical equation on how many times the actual trumpets were blown? I don't have the answer to that, so. Yeah. Kent, I really thought you were going to be an accountant here. I thought you had it. Yeah. Well, listen. Yeah, you just have to sit and really do the math. It's all there in your book for you. Just read it, right? Any other questions or comments? Does anybody want to add anything else? Anybody want to throw something at me? No, Rob.
But part of me, or looking at, just how they think that marching, shouting, and trumpets.
They're going to do it.
Go in and, do it. And it does go back to show, faith in that and the power of God.
So Carolyn's point, I'm not sure if you heard of this. Again, you go back to how crazy it seems that marching, trumpets blaring, shouting, and following. But if you see what happens, there was direct commands to be given. First it was stay what? 2,000, was it 2,000 cubits? What is a cubit, by the way? Does anyone know what a cubit is? How far is a cubit? So I think it was like 2,000 cubits. You had to stay clear of it. And then once it started, then it was your cue to follow and make sure you do exactly as those steps were. So I think not just the fact that it seemed confusing, but just follow every step. If you do that, it will happen. And I think maybe there's a little test in there, follow these weird things. I can't imagine what they must have been thinking when they're being told to do just that, Carolyn. These things that wouldn't particularly win a battle for you. Doing those three things, at the end, some shouting happens and it happens. I think it shows steps, following the commands, and victory will come.
It's no different than Noah. Noah was told to build an ark. Right now, on dry ground, you're going to make this huge, huge, huge boat. Can you imagine what his neighbors are saying?
Yeah, I think these are outlandishly crazy things that I'm being asked to do. And why so many others have failed is they thought just that because it was so crazy or not the norm, I'm just not going to follow it to the T, and therefore we know what happens. It happened over and over again. I think there was a great comic piece about the Ark, right? Build an Ark, what's the Ark? So, yeah, there's a great piece on that. Very funny, but truly, if you follow again those steps and do exactly what he told you, 2 by 2, male, female, get every single animal, every living thing, birds, you're going to make it happen. Again, make it happen. It worked. They followed the orders. So, here we are today.
The answer,
My friend is
the
blowing the
answer
wind.
to the cubit is the length of your forearm.
Oh,
Of
there
a
you
guy, of a man.
see, thank
18
you.
inches,
I
according
figured
to-
I didn't have all the time in the world to research some of the terminologies, but the cubit, it's about the length of a forearm. All right. So about 2,000, was it 2,000? I think it was 2,000 of those. Let's stay this in front. Thank you.
It's
Back there,
approximately 18 inches.
What, 18 inches?
Yeah, so if
Choose-
it, what was it, 2,000 cubits is 3,000 feet.
There you go. All right. She's also back there Googling Joshua's physique. There. Well, we still have 8 minutes, so you have any comments or you want to talk a little more? Oh, we can review. Yeah, if you like. What page? 66. Live the story, take action. We don't want to simply be hearers of the word, but also doers of the word. Doers of the word. Take some time to reflect on what you've had read and studied this week. Did you have a new discovery from your reading and study this week? And if so, I'm guessing you have the answer, Mary. I feel it. Oh, did you have a new discovery from your reading and study this week? And if so, what was it? Anybody want to share what they...
To me, it was the length of time it took them to come to the thing. To me, I always think that the promised land was given to them, and they marched across the river, and we all remember the Battle of Jericho, but we forget about all these other little battles and it lasted, Joshua's lifetime to capture overcome all these things. So, they marched in the desert for 40 years, and then they battled to claim the land that they had for 40 years or so.
31 years.
Struggle. Pain, suffering. It feels like forever. And therefore, I can't imagine what it would feel like 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But yeah, it was.
No, but it was 31 years. We're talking about the picture of Jericho, the picture of all these other things. But that was 31 years. It wasn't like we just went in.
Boom, boom, boom.
This weekend we'll wipe out 3 cities or something.
So, and some of the other reading that I've also read was that I think that the wandering that had happened for that 40 years, it took 40 years to do, but in real time, if they were just to go and it was 1 year it would take. So it literally would have been that quick. But obviously there was reasons for the 40 years, but literally it was that? Probably. Yeah, I could leave that as an interpretation for you. But yeah, it literally said it would take 1 year to do that. And it took 40. So, and I also want to bring up, too, the Jordan River was no easy task. I'm not a historian of sorts, but what I did read, obviously in here, it said it was overflowing its banks. It was overflowing its banks. And from my other readings, it's a 156-mile river. But I had no clue, and if anybody has any concept of how wide that must have been, go ahead.
It's not as wide as
As Bear
Bear Creek.
Creek? Okay. But it was overbearing. So, yeah, no, thank you. Not terrible.
But that's now, and where they're taking water out to irrigate and all that kind of stuff. They didn't do that back in Jesus' time,
Yeah.
or in Joshua's time, or whatever. So it's a much bigger river at that time.
I would imagine
And
so.
it depends also
But even,
on
but
the
even
time
then,
of, the time of year, because they have a rainy season. There used to be areas where it rained a lot and the water would run down through there, fill up the Sea of Galilee and on down to the Dead Sea.
the Dead Sea, yeah. Yeah, so good point, right? Like in back, a whole lot of different things we're doing now, reducing the amount of water, but thank you, that was fantastic. I'm really going to get a vision now every time I drive over Bear Creek. Every single time I'm crossing the Jordan. That's fabulous. But again, 156 miles too, right? Like, that's a really long river. I mean, that's a long ways. So, what else? What? 156 miles?
Here to Sacramento, what's under?
About 130 miles to Sacramento, probably. Yeah, 120, 130 miles. Long enough, you know. And I'm not sure what other provisions that they would have needed to be able to cross that river, but, you know, thank goodness for grace, right? That was, Bear Creek was far more manageable at that point, right? What else you got out there?
Is there something we need to be based on?
Yeah, that's a big one. She was asking number 2, is there something you need to do based on what you learned? I hope you all can do something, right?
Take God very seriously.
Take Him very seriously. Obey His word. Yeah, absolutely. Follow the commandments to the best that you can, and we know we're going to slip up at times, and we know we're sinful beings, right? But knowing too that if we can just try to follow His word, everything works out. That's a really bright thing for me, I know. So, what can you tell about what you learned? Make a plan right now to share with that person. Yeah, don't share your plans yet. But can you? Anybody else want to share what they kind of learned in this last chapter? What was the most important thing you took from this battle? And what came of it? Does anybody want to share that?
Do what the Lord knows.
Follow His
I didn't
commands.
realize until you brought it up just now. I had read the numbers, but I didn't realize there's 31 years that they were fighting in there. You see a battle in a movie, it lasts a few days and it's over with. But there they
That's for effect.
Yeah, for 31
Yeah.
years.
But again, if you're trying to tell a story of battles that went for 31 years, boy, you're going to be here for a while talking about each of those battles. Yeah. But the fear, I think what can be taken too is that before we even entered into some of those battles, the message was coming back already that victory's yours. They're afraid of you. So that surely helped a little bit, right? So there was already fear before they got to a lot of those royal cities, including Ai, right? Like they were fearful of the Israelites and what was going to happen. They'd seen what had happened already. And so they were prepared to go into battle, but again, following the word, that victory was theirs. The other guys, they didn't know that. They didn't know this. But they were fearful of the fact that they'd heard and seen what they'd seen, and word had come down that, man, this is not an army that you would like to contend with. So be prepared. And I'm not sure I would want to dig my heels in and be ready to fight God and the Israelites. I was not ready for that. So it's a big deal. All right. So let's thank you very much for coming tonight. Let's close with a blessing, okay? Thank you very much. All right. Dear Lord, may the love of the Father, the tenderness of the Son, and the presence of the Spirit gladden your heart and bring peace to your soul this day and all days. Amen.